Welcome everyone to our latest edition of Think, Pair, Share. We are in the College and Career Center here at Sharpstown High School with Alejandro Delgado, who is presently the Deputy Commissioner of Operations at Texas Education Agency, but he's worked in IDEA Public Schools, worked with T.E.A. before, also in Houston ISD, where you were Executive Director of Enrollment and Advocacy, in a time where that was desperately needed because we were coming out of lockdown, essentially. And then for the past 8 months, you've been Deputy Commissioner of Operations at TEA, and one of your first big jobs was to come present to Houston families and activists, evidently, the intervention that's planned where TEA is going to be appointing a board of managers to temporarily replace our elected school board starting in June. And so you were the guy that was sent out, and now you're here.
I am, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you for accepting it, because I was so surprised when you said yes. Mr. Delgado, talk to me about those town hall meetings. Did you know what to expect going in, and what did you learn from them after having done 4 of them?
I had an idea of what to expect. Let me actually step back and just say, like, TEA has had 7 of these interventions over the years. Sure. Our last one was in 2019 in Shepherd ISD, which is East Texas, much smaller. And that one, and I was not there, but our team was telling me that same presentation. Few people showed up, they went through the presentation, answered questions, and they got through it. Yeah. So I think the paradigm going into it was, oh, well, it's gonna be like that. Right. And I remember talking to the team and being like, hey guys, like, everything's different. Like, not only is it a bigger district, there's different dynamics at play. There's, it's a lot more. It's in the, it's in the media. Like, it's a big issue, and they're like, no, like, trust us. Like, we can, like, this is how it's.
This PowerPoint's gonna put them to sleep. Don't worry.
and they're like, hey, people are interested in knowing about the process, and we knew that, and then it didn't turn out that way. Yeah. And what we learned as the process went on is like, instead of us and me like saying, here's the process and let me gather some questions, like, the community needs to be heard and wants to be heard. And so what we changed up our formats each time, and by the last couple of meetings we just had a mic up and we were listening, and when a question came up, I tried my best to answer it, but if not, our intention was to listen to community concerns, because it is there's a lot of information out there, some of it accurate, some of it not, and we wanted to make sure that we spoke to people who had questions. It was rough. I mean, like, but that's the, like, leadership role that I had. When you do something hard that's going to impact people, like, it's our responsibility, and it's my responsibility, both as a state or if I was working in the district, to explain it to the extent that we can to the community. So I did see it as, like, a responsibility, and I learned that the community is passionate about these issues.
Or at least the part of the community that shows up to town halls.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting though, because, like, there are a lot of people that showed up. I mean, well, actually, there was a good amount of people that showed up. Sure. But a lot of people were watching online. I mean, the amount of text messages I got were quite a bit. And so even if people did not show up, they were, I mean, I think you too, like, you were logging on online to see what was happening, what was said. So I think, like, when change happens, people want to know. My curiosity as somebody who viewed those was, how does this help? And so as I was watching, and sort of, in fairness to the folks that were speaking out, the way that the event was covered, typically it was the podium was mic'd and the audience was not. And so the live streams looked a lot like you and a lady from TEA standing on stage quietly while people were talking, but you could only tell by their physical sort of animation, and I was like, it'd be great to understand what's going on there, until somebody brought a megaphone. But even that was kind of muffled by the audio that was sort of streamed. And so it just didn't seem like a productive or efficient use of time. And I have to admit, and I told you this before we started, my heart went out to you because you've got a job to do. It's obvious that this is happening for a legal reason.
Certainly, there's a big difference between 2019 and 2023, in as much as that's 4 years more that the country has gotten more polarized, and the rhetoric against public education nationally has really escalated in those 4 years, which I think is a sad thing, and I think a lot of folks in Houston saw this as like a partisan attack. So you work for the commissioner of T.E.A., who's Mike Morath, and he was appointed by a Republican governor. So far as we know or assume, Mr. Morath is therefore aligned with that side of the aisle. What impact does this kind of partisan politics actually have on your day-to-day at T.E.A.? Like, what safeguards are there for that not sort of leaking in to the work?
I think it factors in and it doesn't. Let me explain. So it factors in the sense that you're right, Governor Abbott is the commissioner's boss, who's my boss, but the checks and balances exist at the legislative level. And so they're also our bosses, because the Democrats, Republicans from all over the state write legislation that we then have to implement. So, for example, the bill that led to this intervention was written by a Democrat from Houston. Sure. So, I think in that case, like, depending on the political winds and who's in charge and who's not in charge and who's voice, who's not, that does have an impact on what we implement, not implement. So in that case, yeah, I mean, it factors in. On the other side, I'm a human being. I have an opinion about things, but like when I knew when I came back to T.E.A. that I'm signing on to a nonpartisan agency. So our job is to implement legislation, and it could be legislation that I have personal feelings for or against, and it doesn't matter. Sure. And so that is sometimes hard, to be honest. But it's kind of the privilege and the burden of working as an agency is that you're like the nonpartisan arm of the government.
The specter of that dynamic must have been at play in those town halls. Do you feel like it was an elephant in the room? Did you feel like a desire to name it or speak to it?
I mean, like people. So I think one of the things I noticed so people were connecting dots that didn't exist. So this was connected to vouchers or charterization of the district, and none of that there had been zero discussions about that. And so I think it was people are making those connections, but I can tell you from my perspective, like those connections don't exist.
They sound like conspiracy junk to you?
People. I wouldn't name it like that. Like, people have their beliefs, and I think in some cases they're well informed, some cases they're not.
I remember you named it in the first town hall. I didn't see if you named it in any of the others, but certainly Commissioner Morath has mentioned Wheatley High School in every discussion about this intervention. And so you can't talk about the intervention without talking about Wheatley. Wheatley is an interesting school. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah, some famous people from there.
Yeah. And in a community that has been historically sort of underprivileged and underserved. And so we spoke a little bit about this beforehand. Certainly KIPP and YES Prep are the two most famous sort of Houston-born charter flagships. They both came from that part of the city. Mm-hmm. And when you look at a school like Wheatley, where its attendance zone has thousands of kids that are zoned to Wheatley, less than 800 attend the school. And this is a common problem in our most underprivileged, underserved, and impoverished parts of town. We have neighborhood schools that have, over the years, seen such declines in enrollment that they effectively become alternative schools, or in the sense that...
We get the students who are most underserved.
Yeah, and also, you've worked in a high school. There's an economy of scale kind of thing that goes on, where at a certain number you can actually offer additional programs. But I was a charter school principal like you for a short time, and one thing I learned right away when you run a charter school is everybody has to do everything because there's not enough of us, right? There's not that many kids, there's not that many teachers, there's not that many administrators, and everybody wears all the hats.
I had 3 preps when I was a teacher.
There you go.
Yeah.
See? Proof in the pudding.
I learned a lot.
But did the kids? I'm just kidding. But yeah, sure. I mean, like at the high school level, where you have a graduation plan that's dictated by the state and expectations that are dictated by the state, and then you see this dwindling enrollment, it becomes harder and harder and harder for that school to actually match up to that accountability structure. And so, is it possible that that's what's at play, as opposed to bad leadership or bad teaching? And if that's what is at play, then how do we fix chronically failing schools in a city like ours?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's obviously a factor. I mean, we see it in my hometown of Austin with some of the schools that also have historically struggled. It's absolutely a factor. And, what I would add is there are also examples where there are smaller schools that still do well. And so I think like what is in our control, I mean, as a state at least, it's, our accountability system, it's our rules and laws. And so, we are trying to make sure that we're have the rules and laws in place to support or to hold accountable schools that at least on what the accountability system is not serving students. And so to answer your question, I think it's a factor. I don't know if it's the primary factor, like you. I don't know if you're saying that necessarily.
It seems to be. I don't know if it's primary, but it's certainly one that's not named by anybody in the media right now, whether it be local media or anything that I've seen statewide.
Well, and what I would say to that also is, I think the charter is at play, of course, and we know that. I also think, like, if we think about school choice policies within a district, and we saw this when I was working at Austin ISD, that in the desire to provide families choice, there's some high schools that have the shiny programs and kids want to go there. Right, and part of that is to keep kids in the district, which is the result of charters, and some of it's also to give kids other opportunities. And so I'm not sure if the media is covering it or not, but but the point is like those decisions are made by district leadership and by board leadership as well on where are we going to put programs and why and how and how much are they going to resource them, and so it is to your point, like the story of Wheatley is a very complicated and long and racial and not racial. Like all of that combined.
I think in fairness, there's more than one school in the district that sort of suffers from the conditions I've described, right? Even Sharpstown has an enrollment of between 1750 and 1850 on any given day, because we're in the most international corridor of the most diverse city in the history of the species. It's true. And so we see lots of movement, right? But between 1750 and 1850, but we have about 3,200 kids zoned to Sharpstown. If all of them decided to show up tomorrow, there's no place to put them. In fact, the school is not big enough for the 1750 to 1850 that we have. And my point in bringing this up is that this is the product of decades of board policy. And here we are trying to intervene in this one slice in time and trying to reverse the impact of board policy that's older than you are. So how do I convince HISD parents, but also HISD employees who live it, right? I'm an HISD parent and an HISD teacher. I certainly understand my school better than I understand where my daughter goes, right? There's just, it's your life and your livelihood. So how do I explain this to an HISD employee in such a fashion that's like, this is actually a goal that is achievable?
Those discussions are really valid discussions to have at the board and the superintendent level, because they have an impact, right? For better or for worse, depending on your perspective. And my hope is that we select a group of people who are not necessarily beholden to certain neighborhoods, certain philosophical approaches, or certain I love the way that I had choice.
Yeah.
Right. It's a big debate in Austin ISD. Choice to to transfer between campuses or not choice because you want to protect the neighborhood school. And there are different sides of that within, like, on the same political spectrum, by the way, who like have different opinions on choice within a district. I mean, it's going to be up to the board of managers to have those real conversations with community, because you're right that they have impact, and it's also valid that, like, parents want choice, and kids, if we're going to force a kid to go to a school, like, is that okay? And these are very valid conversations that, like, T.E.A. is staying out of. And that's one thing that I think that I'm wanting to make clear. I know it's hard to make clear because we're like intervening, but
staying out by getting in.
But yeah, I mean, like, sort of, and like, but our hope is that, like, if there's root cause issues, like, hey, talk about them and fix them, right? And hopefully, like, we're taking a little bit of the politics out of it, because you're not beholden to certain groups or waiting to get elected. And so we will see if that works. The hope is that it is. I mean, that's what our hope is, to hire people who will, like, let's have these real conversations without, like, the same people speaking in our ears about what to say and what to do. And so I think the conversations need to happen. Right, and where it lands is where it lands, but it's got to be, like, locally based people who know the good, the bad, and the ugly with it, because it's not all bad and ugly.
Sure.
And then make the policy decisions to best support students.
Are you worried about the intervention being a failure?
Absolutely.
What are your big concerns?
Well, one, that we don't improve the student experience, right? Like, the whole thing was that we want to support our lowest performing schools. Right. I'm also worried that, I'm worried that staff don't feel valued, right? The goal of this also is to build on the good work that HISD administration is doing now with staff, and to continue to support teachers, well-resource them. And so, we want staff to stay. So we're worried about staff leaving.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned that, because that's my big concern.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I do here is I'm typically present in every interview committee, and I spend a lot of time developing teachers, but I also spend a lot of time cultivating relationships with folks to bring them here. And my concern is instability is bad for the brand, right? Just like, as I come from a third world country, and corporations don't want to invest in an unstable country. You never know if the government's going to change. That kind of dynamic might be at play. And the concern that I have is that whether it actually feels unstable to folks on the inside or not, on the outside looking in, it looks as if HISD is an unstable entity, and probably not the organization I should invest my initial years as an educator in, or because HISD pays well compared to some of the districts around us, but that sort of opportunity cost feels a little bit bigger now, because, well, the state's intervening in HISD, so maybe I should stay wherever I am. We started this year with a teacher shortage that was in the hundreds, more than 400 teacher shortage, 400 teachers missing from our classrooms at the beginning of the year, and it didn't get better for a long time, and it's still not perfect. I think that there's still schools that are understaffed, and so it's hard for folks in HISD to imagine that this is going to improve those conditions, and so my concern for you is that everybody at the table has the best interest at heart. We go through all these pangs to intervene, and the school district doesn't perform as well as it did before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a valid concern. I mean, it's also one of the reasons I was a little bit unfortunate about the community meetings is that, the way that it was portrayed, there were maybe like 100 people in that first room. The district has 190,000 students, probably 100,000 parents, and there was 100. And the way that it was portrayed was total chaos. Yeah. And or the second day, there was a lady who was supportive, and she basically got booed off. Yeah. And so, the narrative about this is also, like, it's something that makes me nervous, because, like, one of the reasons I came to talk to you, like, hey, like, I'm a real person. I've got kids, I got a family, I care about education, I care about kids that look like me, doing well, and like we're committed to making this work, because it's a it's a big deal and it's risky and then there's kids' lives who they depend. I mean, they're down the hallway. There's teachers who come to work who depend on making a difference, getting a paycheck, right? Like having a career. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we're nervous, and I mean, this is why I think even more convicted to find the right people at that leadership level who both from a superintendent perspective and from a board, have a big role in what happens or doesn't happen in a district. And what I would tell folks is, one, we're committed to a smooth transition. So like our folks are already talking to Superintendent House and his administration and the board. In fact, one of our people is giving a board presentation tomorrow, like in front of the board.
Do you know what the icebreaker activity is going to be for that?
I don't know.
I just won the podcast. In case you were wondering, I just won.
Trust falls, probably.
I had a way to steal the thunder, man. Good job. That would be
but like
fun
it's
YouTube
a valid
shorts.
question. We know it's not easy, and I think like that. If I could have expressed like anything at the community meetings, I think like we're working our hardest, and like we have the students and the families and the staff's best interest in minds in all of this, and like. It's not something that's like Commissioner Brown says, oh yeah, let's do it out of thin air. Like this was a law that's been in play since 2015. The legislature has had 2 times, the last 2 legislative sessions, to do something about it.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
Right.
And so like that, I mean, the commissioner is as an appointed person, constitutionally sworn officer, like has to follow the law.
Yeah.
And so that's something that gets lost a little bit, is like we have to do what we have to do even when it's not. It was painful.
I think what the perception is that it was his choice to be. He's been given the choice to do it, but what I'm hearing you say is he must do it.
Well, the law is a must. So the way that it worked is that if there's a school that has a school that's underperforming according to the accountability system for 5 or more years. So in the current system, F-rated school. For more than 5 years, the commissioner has 2 choices. Well, the district has the commissioner has 2 choices if the district takes certain action. So the commissioner can either close the specific school in question, or appoint a board of managers. That gets avoided if the district either closes the school themselves or chooses to partner with the charter. So, for example, in Houston ISD, they have a similar school that's been on underperforming for, I think, between 8 and 9 years now already, and they chose to partner with a charter operator, which basically meant an accountability pause. So they avoided the commissioner decision, and so, but Houston ISD didn't do that, and so as a result, and they didn't do that in 2019. As a result, commissioner had to make a choice: close Wheatley or appoint a board of managers.
In watching 2, I think, well done interviews with Mr. Morath, one by KHOU here in Houston and another one by the Houston Chronicle, and I think maybe another newspaper worked on that together. What hasn't been clear as to why one instead of the other.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. Well, so what I can say is that Commissioner decided not to close the school, and I think the closing schools is always a very tough decision for district personnel, boards, etc. So I also think he thought like to better address the issues in Houston ISD, because it's not the only underperforming school.
Right.
That that necessitated a leadership change to address the systemic issues that are impacting HISD. So that's the reason. And I think in almost all cases, like back in 2019, a similar issue happened in Shepherd ISD.
Sure.
And decided not to close the school, but instead to appoint a board of managers in Shepherd ISD.
What's I think also confusing is, and then you've done this as well in this interview, is there, on the one hand, leadership change is required. On the other hand, Millard House is doing a great job. I'm not saying that Millard House is doing a great job or not. I'm going to be impartial in that. But I think if I'm just a person watching an interview, those 2 things don't make sense.
Yeah. What I can say to that, I think, is from what I hear from the commissioner, is that it's a fresh start. It's a fresh start for the district. I think Superintendent House has done a really good job, and Commissioner thinks really highly of him in very difficult circumstances, and like has made a lot of progress with the district. But they're brand new folks, like it probably makes sense to do a fresh start.
It's clear that a board of managers is going to be appointed from a pool of applicants, and applicants I think have until April 30th to
Extended the deadline, I think April 20th, but potentially April 30th.
Okay. But they have a little bit of time left to still apply. But from that pool of applicants, a board will be appointed, and that board will be appointed in June, right? Mm-hmm. What's not 100% clear is whether that board of managers is going to appoint the new superintendent, or whether Mike Morath is going to.
Commissioner Morath will appoint the superintendent.
Do you know who it is? Because Twitter says it's Mike Miles.
Yeah, I do. Commissioner's not made a final decision yet.
Okay. You do, but...
No, I'm saying, like, I do know that Commissioner's considering it.
I see.
Yeah.
If it's somebody whose name has been floated for a long time, mm-hmm. I think there's another optical problem for T.E.A. to deal with as well. What do you think?
I mean, we will see what the Commissioner ends up deciding on the superintendency. But yeah, Commissioner will make the decision on he or she, whoever that person be, but I know he's actively making final decisions.
Commissioner, if you're watching, if it's somebody you worked with before, everybody's going to say bad things. I'm just saying. Not me, other people. Let me keep my job. So I want to sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about how the state accountability system works for districts as complex as HISD. We've got, you were talking before about AISD being 50% free and reduced lunch. Was that?
Yeah, it's about 51% economically disadvantaged.
And Houston ISD is much closer to all. I think we're 85%, but I'll tell you, even at Sharpstown, we have a number of parents that refuse to fill out the paperwork because they're undocumented. You can't tell me that those folks aren't economically disadvantaged. So even the number that you see is probably lower than the reality. That's probably true in AISD as well. And so we're talking about a district that's complex in a lot of ways. What I've always sort of, what's always sort of stuck in my throat a little bit about accountability is how, as a state, we look at schools, how we divide them up into groups. So for example, at Sharpstown, if you look at our, what used to be called the AEIS report, which now...
Taper.
Yeah.
We have a super taper report too.
Oh, that's cool. Sounds like an awesome haircut. That, if you look at that report, it looks like any other school, right? Mostly Hispanic, a little bit of African American, and the truth is, those are just catch-alls for an extremely diverse school, right? Mm-hmm. We have dozens and dozens of languages spoken here, dozens and dozens of countries represented here. A lot of those countries are in Latin America, but the Northern Triangle experience is very different than the Argentine experience, is very different than the Puerto Rican and Cuban experience. Likewise, we have African American students here whose families have been here for generations, but very few. Most of our students that identify as black are either from Honduras or Cuba or from sub-Saharan Africa. And again, their story is so different. So we have this accountability system that seems reductive. And I think a lot of us are concerned that it's an accountability system that was designed with the average school in mind. And so many schools in HISD, especially those schools that are being sort of called into question for performance, right? I mean, we have schools like DeBakey and Carnegie and HSPBA and Bel Air and Lamar that historically have done well as far as accountability is concerned, but they also look a lot like a typical school as far as the state is concerned, right? You can kind of reverse engineer that based on what the state writes. And so we're looking at a school like Sharpstown or a school like Wheatley. At what point does the accountability system take into account that these experiences are different without the same old line of, the sort of soft bigotry of lowered expectations, right? If I just got here from Honduras, it's not soft bigotry to have curriculum for me that's different than the standard English 1 curriculum. But if you look at what TEA publishes in the way of TEKS for ESOL 1, English as a second, English for speakers of other languages 1, that acronym has changed maybe 4 times since I've been an educator. They're exactly the same TEKS as English 1, except there's this boilerplate language that's been tacked on that says, or teacher differentiates as he or she sees fit, right? They sort of differentiate as you see fit. The state's not going to tell you what needs to be done differently. Same TEKS, but do differentiate. That seems like passing the buck on to the district. And I think that if TEA has an optical problem, a political problem with a district like ours, it could go a long way in naming these things and maybe addressing real supports for the actual kids that we have in the district.
I mean, it's a complex question, not only for the district, but it's a complex question also for the state, in the sense that, like, developing an accountability system and a system to measure performance for a state as big as Texas, as diverse as Texas. I was in Wichita Falls yesterday. Wow. Their largest district in that region 9, their largest district is Wichita Falls. They're about 14,000 kids, but every other district has like less than 400 kids. And very different challenges than HISD, but also like there's nuances in the system. And one thing that I will say that I think it's important, because TEA, like for example, State Board of Education actually writes the TEKS. That's not part of TEA.
But it's on your website, so that's confusing.
No, you're right, but it's a State Board, because we work together, but like those are elected officials, by the way, who are...
I thought State Board, is it State Board elected or appointed?
They're elected. They're elected. So you have an elected representative that you can share your concerns with related to standards and TEKS.
I see.
So that's just important. But that's just, hey, you have someone to talk to you about.
You gotta pass the buck. You gotta pass the buck. I got it. It's all right.
But I mean, it matters because I remember like sometimes, well, TA did that. No, we didn't.
I've never been to the SBEC website to look for TEKS.
SBOE are appointed. That's the certification, folks. SBOE, State Board of Education, are the elected. They're in charge of state curriculum.
Well, thank you for educating me.
But the point is like, and just FYI, just like provide information, both the standardized test and the accountability system are required by the federal government.
A standardized test.
A standardized test and an accountability system is required. So you know, we would be breaking the law if we did not have those two, the accountability system and a standardized test.
Do you think there's other states doing it better though?
We're constantly like we we're Texas, right? We like to do our own thing.
We're the best.
And
we were a country. We collaborate with folks across the country, and we're constantly looking about what we can do. So just know that. Other things is that we have tried our hardest, and I think one of the things I appreciate about Commissioner Murat's leadership of the agency that I appreciate, just personal basis, is there's a big spirit of continuous improvement. So one of the things that we're doing this year is we're refreshing the accountability system, and we're raising the standard on CCMR, College Career Military Readiness, because we change a lot of calculations behind the scenes based on what we hear from educators, what we hear from superintendents. So it's like complicated because it's behind the scenes, but we actually like are trying our best to capture, to the extent that we can, the nuances of the system and the nuances of districts. So for example, one of the big things that came out of the agency through the accountability system is a more clear and more accurate focus of what it means to make progress. And capturing more data points so that we are capturing the different aspects of what progress actually means, so that we're not harming schools with more economically disadvantaged students. So that has been a product of the accountability accountability system over the previous years. Is like these mathematical calculations that I don't understand. That exists in the system. It's okay. Nobody does.
That exists in the system. Well, but the reality is we have like teams of really smart people who are like thinking about that a lot in order to capture the best experience that we can of the nuances of different campuses.
We have teams of really smart people that created a formula that constantly needs to be addressed and readdressed. And you mentioned CCMR. And so you're saying, I can't remember the exact verb you used, but was it sort of tightening up CCMR or?
Yeah, raising the standard of
Raising
CCMR.
the standard of CCMR.
We saw a number of schools in, not my style to start naming schools, who exploited what seemed to be some loopholes in CCMR rules and catapulted from D status to B status. As a school leader, should I be worried about how to exploit your rules to get a score, or should I be worried about educating my kids the best way that I can?
I mean, obviously your primary concern is educating the kids as best you can. And we have an accountability system that, part of the reason for an accountability system is when you put pressure and you shine the light on community subgroups that are not performing, that makes the adults take action. Because in the absence of accountability system, and this is one of the reasons why I'm personally a believer in it, like kids that look like me might be forgotten, right? And not shown. I mean, like that's a big problem in my mind. And so, like I hear your concerns and I think they're valid, and I would say, like, we have folks who are talking to districts and district staff all the time. Like our you probably don't see this, but like the stakeholder engagement that we do on our testing and accountability side, I mean, not only are there formal groups, there's lots of informal communication on like, this was not right, or let me give you some, like, what this actually looked like in the field. I mean, we are constantly iterating and hearing from what's going on in order to make improvements for a system that has to be like one size for a state as big as Texas. And the other thing I would add, by the way, like this is more related to testing, is to make like testing more customizable, to make it less summative, like just one test one day. It requires a lot of money, like a lot of funding from the legislature. And so
is it between education and healthcare? Those are two big things that the legislature.
So STAR testing costs about $75 million in a budget that's like, I think 30 billion or something like that. So like if it's a chunk, but it's also a relatively small percentage in the.
When you consider almost all of that salaries, then it's a lot.
Yeah.
So how have you raised the standards on CCMR? How's that going to look for schools?
So what it meant. Well, so what we're doing this year is we're going to call it a A through F refresh. So we're refreshing our accountability system, which we're required to do every 5 years.
By the feds.
By the legislature. The feds say you have to have an accountability system. The legislature gives a little bit more of the rules, and they say every 5 years.
That's the Texas legislature? Or?
Texas. And so this year we're on year 5. And so what it means basically is that to get certain points in the accountability system, you have to get CCMR points, and we're going from 60% to 88%.
Inherent to that, I suppose, is that more schools are going to have lower grades this year than the year before?
There might be. There could be.
And there's your out. If the scores go down in HISD, you could just blame what you did on the CCMR.
No, which we will not do.
I'm actually happy about the CCMR because when I saw schools who exploited those loopholes in CCMR in ways that I found to be legal but unethical, my first thought was, that should be illegal.
And we've seen that specifically, and we're making changes this year, but there are some schools that use, for example, Microsoft Word as a way to drive those numbers up, and it's literally copy paste. Yeah. And that's not good for kids either.
I'm like, well, why aren't we doing that, right? Because we've got Adobe Creative Suite. Ask your wife, who's a graphic designer. Is that easy? No, it's not. It's a tough certification exam.
Yeah, that's right.
Meanwhile, Microsoft Word, they're using Clippy, the little paperclip to get their certification. It's not fair. It's not fair. A lot of the CTE exams are sort of these sort of non-standardized, sort of ragtag kind of exams too. I mean, there's so many certification exams in the CTE pathways, and some of them are just some dude in a trailer. Let's just be honest, right? I mean, just trying to get this money, y'all. And then on the other side of the spectrum, some of them are really difficult.
Yeah, they are. Some of them.
I'm looking at your aluminum weld, and it's not perfect. You don't get it.
Or you have to or to your aluminum weld, you have to build a plane.
Right.
And it's very.
It has to fly.
Yes, it has to fly and keep people safe.
The whole CTE landscape seems like a little Wild West.
And we are trying our best to make it less Wild West, which of course people don't always like.
Sure.
As a state, we have a responsibility to like set the standards, and that's very hard, and set the rules, because you have Houston ISD and you have Vernon ISD, which has 250 kids.
Gotta call out Vernon like that.
I love Vernon, actually. It actually has more kids than that, but there's much smaller districts in the state with very different issues, very different problems, very different strengths also. And that's hard. And as a state, we have to do our best to both have a standard and differentiate to the best that we can, given our also limited resources. I mean, the T.E.A. is only about 1,000 employees for a state.
Yeah, I looked up, it was 1136.
Yeah, 1136 then. Yeah, I mean, that's not,
It's not that many, many at all. I mean, that's just a few schools. What's up with the D or F thing? It's like, if you have a report card and a D is a passing grade, Mike Morath was saying that he wants to see no schools in HISD with a D or F rating in order to sort of stop the intervention.
No multi-year.
At what year does multi-year become multi-year?
It's like consecutive.
So two.
Two in a row, yeah.
So if a school gets a D one year and a D the next year, not good enough.
That's considered multi-year.
What's the point of having a D if it's not good enough?
It's just part of the accountability system.
I've never understood what the other letters stand for, but we all kind of, like, as kids, because they skip E when they go from D to F, we all assume F stands for failing. Didn't you feel that way?
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
But then, I guess D stands for damned or something? I had no idea.
It's still low, right? And I think, like, you're right that it's not the, like, failure or the F.
Yeah.
But one thing that we've seen a little bit over the years is, like, schools stay on the D. So you see a lot of, like, multi-year Ds.
Yeah.
And that's not good either.
Right.
Or good enough. I mean, that still means you're, like, in the certain, like, bottom percentage of schools statewide. And so I hear you on the, like, well, it's like not an F. You're right. And if we're gonna rest our laurels on, like, hey, but we're D, great, and for multiple years, like, I don't think that's right for kids either.
I think the weird itch that so many folks, I think, were expressing in those town hall meetings, and also in just everyday conversations I have with HISD employees, which constitute like 90% of my friends, because I don't have a life outside of work, is well, all the other urban school districts in Texas have schools that are multi-year, either failing schools or close to it. Houston's no different in that regard. Houston's got a B rating as a district, just like Dallas ISD does.
I think what we saw that was different is there again, it's like a small subset of schools. I mean, like, and I said this, and then I don't know if people believe it, but, like, HISD, to your point, has, like, some of the best schools in the country, best schools in the state.
Yeah.
And there's been a small set of schools, and it's small, but it's still kids.
It's a small set of schools that represent a huge swath of the city geographically, too, to your point.
So that's interesting, and that have been, like, underperforming. And it's not like 1 year here, 2 years here.
Yeah.
I don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. And y'all are big, but also, like, if it's a smaller district that only has one school, like, that's still one school. And so, and you're right, every district has these issues, and other districts have taken different choices with those subset of schools. So you see Dallas ISD converted them to A schools, Austin ISD partnered, or they improve them, right? And they get out of IR, improvement required. So I think we just haven't seen that with those subset of schools here in Houston ISD.
Well, anybody can hold anybody else accountable, I could say, well, you're not wearing a jacket. I'm holding you accountable because you're not wearing a jacket. Then you put the jacket on, like, I'm holding you accountable. You're not wearing a tie. I can just keep going criticizing you about what you're doing wrong. But to what extent does T.E.A. support schools beyond just hold them accountable?
I mean, think about what the state function is. So first of all, let me just say this, that you asked about the accountability system. One of the things that the accountability system under Commissioner Rath has changed and shifted to is it's like the final score is the better of a proficiency or growth. And so no matter where students from Kashmir or whatever, Wheatley, et cetera, start with, we acknowledge that, like, if you're starting from behind but you've grown, that's great. We're going to celebrate that, and you're going to receive that score. Right. So like that's an important point, that is not always made is that, and that adjustments have been made in just the past few years, is that it's not just about proficiency, because that is more aligned with like, socioeconomic rates, but growth is not. And so that's one way that the accountability system has adjusted to communities with generational poverty, et cetera. And in terms of support, I mean, like we are, and one thing I'm proud of, so I think there's a couple things. One, T.E.A is a regulatory agency. So our job traditionally has been set the rules, enforce the laws.
Yeah.
So like that's a state.
That's a valid answer to my question.
That's a state function.
Yeah, sure.
And one of the reasons why I'm personally invested in T.E.A at this time under Commissioner Morath is that, like, for example, the mission statement of the agency shifted and changed. We added the word support.
Yeah. Why did you do that?
Because there's a strong belief from all of us at the agency, and why I'm invested in working for Commissioner Morath and T.E.A now, that like we will continue to have our regulatory role to hold schools accountable. Are you wearing the right jacket?
Yeah.
And what you don't see is all the resources that come out of the agency, all the the conversations we have with legislators to say, hey, have you looked into HISD to further fund them? With our focus on instructional strategy, we started the state's first Grow Your Own program to grow future teachers from our lowest income communities.
Sure.
Right, that came from T.E.A. That's a T.E.A. Grow Your Own initiative to grow paraprofessionals, to grow kids in like the CTE program, to grow them into future teachers.
Yeah.
That didn't exist. It's also our role to the theory here is that you hold the system, the school system accountable to supporting their students. And so ultimately, and this is local control, the responsibility of the superintendent, the board, and the board of trustees to support their schools.
If you could go back and talk to those folks in those town halls now, or if you have a message for the folks in Houston who pay attention to public education, folks that are employed by a district, even students, what do you want to, in the sort of most succinct possible way, what do you want to tell them about the intervention?
The students, families, communities, teachers, and staff matter to the agency. They matter to Commissioner Morath, they matter to the agency, they matter to the state of Texas, right? And I think this is an example of this community mattering to us and taking an action that hasn't happened before, and that is a big deal. We wouldn't do it if it didn't matter. And you've got to be rest assured that the folks that we take this appointment process really seriously, so that it represents y'all's community values, the values of the Houston community. It represents the aspirations of the teachers. It represents like wanting to do best for kids. And so that is the core of this intervention at this point of the process, is finding a group of local Houstonians that will you can be proud of as a teacher, and that your kids can be proud of as students of Houston ISD.
Mr. Delgado, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a learning experience and a hearing experience.
And I'm learning too.
And look forward to having you back on
Appreciate it.
as we go through this process.
Of course.
Together.
Appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.